I'd just like to welcome Brad Olsen, the CEO of Infometrics, who's online and joining us, I believe, from windy Wellington. And Brad's just going to give us a bit of an outline on where we're at with the regional economy and a few trends and bits and pieces and things that are going on in that space. So welcome, Brad.
Kia ora, thank you very much. I've however, transposed my position. I'm currently in Auckland after a few last-minute flight changes coming to you from the Stats NZ office, where we've just come out of the GDP lockup. Good news to start with is that the economy has seen a touch of a recovery at the start of this year. GDP is up 0.8% for the March 2025 quarter, with a few different drivers, some high export numbers that are coming forward, the likes of professional services that is recovering as well, a bit more residential construction and similar. So encouraging signs, but of course questions about the future. Let me, if I may, share some homework that I've done before and show that as we go through, and then taking questions afterwards. It's not a huge slide pack. Despite the fact that there was that burst of recovery at the start of this year, we're still worried, I guess, about the future for the New Zealand economy, and of course what that means coming through for the Waikato region. The numbers suggest that there has been a bit of a pullback, a slowdown in that economic recovery for the last couple of months. Part of that just because everyone's a bit cautious and concerned generally, and part of that again driven by the fact that global economic factors are quite challenging. You've had ongoing discussions around tariffs on, off and otherwise, and we're still coming quite close to the time when those tariff pauses that were in place for 90 days will come off. And of course, over the last week, we've seen renewed instability in the Middle East with the Israel-Iranian attacks and conflict occurring, which has pushed petrol prices up around 10% over the last week. So that GDP data, just noted that before, better starting point, but I think most people are thinking that yes, there was some good rallying of economic activity towards the end of last year, start of this year, particularly a good sort of tourism boost that came through over the summer period. But the last couple of months of figures have shown not necessarily outright softness, just not quite as much continued momentum. One challenge I think that's both important short and long term was in the details of today's data. We saw that some of the investment that businesses are making into the likes of research and development has pulled back a touch and has continued to do so in the first 3 months of the year, just suggesting that, again, businesses a little bit cautious about some of that wider investment they need to make. However, on the flip side, having been at field days last week, it does suggest that the primary sector is looking to do a little bit more investment and hopefully bring some more productive gains forward. A lot more people talking quite positively about some of the investments that they are going to make. The economic result that we saw today for the first 3 months of the year nationally very much is also one of the better economic results you've seen around the world, excluding China, and that's only because they're growing at a much faster pace than we sort of could ever hope to in a sense. So again, sort of helpful to highlight that there is a bit more of that recovery coming through, but it is still from sort of a pretty deep spot. The biggest driver both of the current recovery and going forward by our estimations is going to be the primary sector. You can see on this chart the rising commodity prices that are coming through for a number of New Zealand's key exports across the likes of meat, dairy and horticulture. Now, we've also inflation adjusted these commodity prices to give you sort of a more realistic idea of actual sort of profitability and money out the other side. You'll see on that basis that forestry remains fairly poor because costs have increased in that industry so much. What these figures highlight is that, again, from a primary sector point of view, there is more money coming forward. Having had a look before at some of the numbers for the likes of the Waikato region specifically, Infometrics now estimates 4.8 billion in the dairy payout for the season that's just finished. That was up 1.1 billion on a season before, which means that there's a whole bunch more cash that can be unleashed. Probably isn't going to be immediately. There does look like there's more of a focus first for farmers to pay down debt quite responsibly, do a bit of deferred maintenance, and then eventually there'll be a bit more spending out the other side. But the numbers at the moment for the likes of the dairy sector in particular, plus the rest, the likes of meat and horticulture, that will add more money into the economy. It just takes a while. And in fact, that dairy payout might well be bigger than the unlocked money from lower interest rates this year too. The spending that's been coming forward in the numbers does suggest, though, a bit of a regional shift. As you can see on this chart, regional core retail sales in the March 2025 quarter, according to Stats NZ data, grew at a larger and faster pace, generally in the South Island compared to the North Island over the last year. I think that's a combination of two things. One, stronger international tourism over the end of last year, start of this year, does seem to have been a bit more concentrated around the South Island in general, of course, like Queenstown, Mackenzie, all those sort of areas attracting a little bit more, Milford too. And at the same time, of course, a good primary sector payout across the traps, no matter what part of the world you're in. It's just that the North Island in general had much drier conditions compared to the South Island for the first couple of months of this year and the end of 2024. And that means that we saw a 70% increase in PKE palm kernel imports. And so sort of basically higher feed costs looks like they've sort of limited just how good that increase in the primary sector has been definitively in the North Island. With all of that, we've seen the Reserve Bank continuing to cut interest rates, and they're expected to continue to do so, although there's a little bit more wavering now than there was a couple of months back, with the Reserve Bank now sort of expected to not make any changes to the official cash rate when it next meets in July. Just a little bit more inflationary pressure, a little bit better economic news than they might have originally thought, is all sort of suggesting that perhaps there's a need to press pause, just wait and assess what all of the economic changes recently have meant to the economy going forward. Probably most importantly, structurally, out the other side, when the official cash rate eventually levels out, probably somewhere around 3%, and we're pretty close to that at the moment, you'll see on this chart that the official cash rate will still be quite considerably above where it was back in 2019, sort of normal pre-pandemic levels. And so it does suggest that we're not trying to stimulate the economy at the moment. We're just trying to take our foot off the brake, but not try and stimulate it. Otherwise, we'd get a whole bout more of further inflation. Because those inflationary pressures do worry us a little bit at the moment. We've seen that headline inflation sitting at 2.5%, and some of the partial indicators, like the monthly food prices that you can see on screen, having now re-accelerated up to 4.4% for the food price index on the latest data. It's the highest it's been since the end of 2023. It's not the highest it's ever been, clearly, but it does start to make us uncomfortable that you've got a number of those further pricing pressures coming through for households, the likes of food, of course, butter and meat, higher international prices putting more pressure on prices at home, chocolate, coffee, olive oil, all increasing too because of international supply constraints. We've seen further increases in other areas, though. You look at the likes of energy prices, electricity and gas getting more expensive, the largest increases in about a decade. And at the same time, worries around those further increases in fuel prices because of the Middle East conflict we're seeing at present. In terms of activity, more broadly across the country and sort of how that then feeds through into the Waikato region, you can see that jobs activity has declined everywhere. Don't let the colours fool you. Even orange is sort of less of a decline rather than an outright gain. But you can see as well that there is generally more or better results or less bad results coming through for the South Island compared to the North. For the Waikato region, again, things having pulled back a bit, but not to the degree that you've seen in other parts of the country. You can see the likes of Tairāwhiti, Gisborne, but also your neighbouring areas of Auckland and similar, not doing quite as flash in recent times. And I think it is that combination of the primary sector and a number of other things, particularly the likes of population growth, that have been helping the region in recent times. To one point that was mentioned in the covering report, as I understand it, that is one sort of challenge that I think is probably going to come through or is coming through for the Waikato region into the future. The area's had quite strong population growth over time, but that hasn't although it has helped drive economic activity, hasn't helped drive as much economic activity. And so GDP per person is still rising, but sort of rising at a slower pace. It's just not keeping the same gap as it used to with the national average and similar, which does suggest that there's a need to continue to upskill people, to invest in the right equipment, and similar to support more of that activity over time. So it's not just people growth, but it's economic activity growth that shows through too. In terms of employment in the region, I think this starts to give you a little bit of a flavour of what's happening both nationally and locally. Looking at the Waikato region and in particular, with monthly job figures out for the April 2025 month, you can see the key drivers of employment around the likes of health and education, both driven by the likes of central government spending, but at the same time, a bit of an increase in primary sector employment, mining as well, better gold production coming out of the mine in Hauraki. But the other end of the spectrum, most parts of the economy seeing a contraction in activity across the likes of, transport, the real estate market, accommodation and food services. So tourism, international tourism doing better, but domestic travellers numbers down because households are still keeping their cash in their wallet a bit more. Professional services down, but the big one really is that big fall in construction, just not quite as much activity happening in that space as residential consents have fallen back and similar. One of the bigger worries, though, that we have alongside the general drop-off in jobs in a number of key industries is the fact that it's hitting young people the most. If we look at employment in the Waikato region by age group, you can see nearly or over 1,800 jobs fewer for 15 to 24-year-olds over the last year. 1,000 jobs dropped for the 25 to 34-year-olds. Part of that is all, of course, why you're seeing a loss of young talent, particularly out of New Zealand. Some smaller losses through the other age groups, but a bigger gain in that 35 to 44 group. Just highlighting that, again, as the labour market adjusts, you are seeing younger demographics that are being hit more. They just don't have quite the same level of experience, and that often counts against them when bosses and similar have to make some more difficult decisions. I guess that the broad and final concluding point that I wanted to make is that there's a lot of moving parts out there in the economy at the moment. There's a lot of stuff that we're looking at short term as the economy evolves, particularly around the likes of international global affairs that are influencing the New Zealand market a whole lot more. Although we've been getting some better economic momentum figures in the short term, we're still, I guess, a bit worried or cautious about things in the future. So we're just being a bit careful, I think, on our expectations. There are some good fundamentals in the Waikato. There are some good numbers that have been coming through in some areas, some more challenging ones in others, particularly around construction. That's not unusual. It's a trend we're seeing across the country, but it does highlight that we're still in for a more constrained economy in general. We're not getting back to those sort of heady heights that we saw during parts of the recovery from the pandemic, because effectively we borrowed 5 years worth of money to try and get us through. That was, an important call to make, but it also means that at some point you've got to repay your credit card bill. With that, I'll turn over to the chair and through you questions. Feel free to pepper me with as much as you want. I'm also expecting to come back, I think, in August, where I'll provide a slightly more detailed update on the latest quarterly data for the Waikato, because I think the day that the committee is due to meet is when our latest quarterly update will come out, which means I'll have some more refreshed economic insights.
Thank you very, very much for that update, Brad. Really, really interesting on a lot of those figures. Just prior to going to questions, we've got our principal economist, Blair Keenan, online. Blair, did you want to add anything to that at this stage?
Kia ora koutou. I won't take up too much airtime, but thanks, Brad, for the update. Interested in those cyclical sort of movements, but also have in the back of my mind the kind of structural elements in relation to the Waikato economy. And I guess I'm thinking about this in the context of government policy around regional deals and things. We're moving away from, decades of very sort of hands-off, let the market sort of work things out. And I'm wondering whether we're moving into kind of an era of much more hands-on industrial policy and what you think that might mean for the Waikato region.
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, I guess the broad comment there around the structural piece and sort of future government policy, there is, I guess, still a bit more of a hands-off approach that I find coming through from government in terms of sort of direct engagement into industries or similar. And I think you saw some of that in the budget where government was quite keen to try and pull back a bit in a few spaces, particularly around sort of social policy supports. Where I can see a greater focus from government is more around getting the structures right so that private business can take up that opportunity. So be it, some of the changes around the likes of RMA reform and similar, wanting to sort of make as much of a permissive operating environment as possible. That seems to be an area that the government's quite keen on, and a reduction in overall regulatory burden. Sometimes that is changing very much, though, around who or what regulators actually are doing what work into the future. I guess probably the biggest one for the Waikato region going forward, in my mind, on that basis, would be what are the sort of comparative advantages that the region has that it wants to press forward on, and how does it adjust within them? So by that I mean very difficult, right, for the Waikato to come out, I think, and go, look, we're going to put everything else, all the good stuff we do aside, and we are going to become the San Francisco of New Zealand. We're going to go all in on tech and stuff the rest. We'll just sort of completely ignore that. Or that, we're going to become the next major rocket launching area. You could do some of that, but I think to sort of completely ignore the important structural pieces that you're already very good at, which is around some of that food and fibre, but also the machinery and technology that comes from it. The question, I think, would be, how do you enable more of that over time? And how do you use some of the previously already unlocked structural changes to support? The likes of the Waikato Expressway, for example, really has opened up more development, population growth and similar. But it's how do you then sort of support that wider level of investment coming forward? I've been quite struck on that front by how often when I talk to people about potential manufacturing and sort of industrial expansions, that people are looking sort of much more south below sort of southern Auckland and Drury. They're looking sort of more into the likes of South Waikato and to the likes of Waipa district and still through much of the Waikato district itself. But that sort of shift down, people are wanting space, they're wanting that manoeuvrability on their industrial base, and there seems to be a real advantage for that, plus the other sort of more advanced niche manufacturing options that go on. The Waikato's quite good at that.
Thanks for that, Brad. I'll come to questions in the chamber, and starting with Chris.
Thanks, Chair Warren. Chris Hughes, Brad, thank you very much for your report. Excellent. Very informative. I've got a series of questions, so I'll just go through them, and then if you need to revert back, please ask. Just anecdotally, I've been talking with a couple of our major dealers, heavy capital goods. One of them in particular, his biggest dealer in New Zealand, hasn't sold a piece of equipment in the last 6 months, which is telling you something about what's going on out there. Projections for the RBNZ rate cuts on your graph showed a bit of a lipping up. I'm interested in where you think have we hit the bottom, and is it likely to continue that chart? Horticulture is showing a very strong trend, and in fact the biggest trend of anything. I thought it's outpushed dairy. Is that likely to continue, and what is the major drive for that? 4.8 billion going into the dairy payout. That'll be in August. When do you expect that to hit, the impact of that to hit the economy? What is driving the West Coast spending? They're a standout. I assume Queenstown's not included in there, so just interested in what's driving that. And one which is close to our hearts, what do you expect the impact of rates and electricity increases to be on our future cost of living? I guess it's going to be coming out in the next 6 months or so. Thank you.
Certainly. That's quite a list of questions. Let me rattle through them. On the transport and heavy equipment side, we are seeing some of that coming through in the numbers in terms of a bit less investment. I think also you're seeing some better deals coming out with a number of operators that are either really wanting to sell stuff at sort of a cheaper price, or a greater level of particularly construction liquidations, which means there's a bit more kit on market as well. I think what we are seeing, though, is that there is still a healthy level of investment into some areas. It's just quite spread. It's not quite the right term, but it's quite siloed. It's not sort of that every piece of machinery or every bit of plant machinery and equipment that a business could buy is improving. The sort of specific things seem to be talked about or invested in more. And so I expect that some of the more technological options are probably the areas that businesses are trying to get ready for a bit more investment, but also not wanting to over capitalize. So it might well be sort of more specific areas, because what we are seeing is you talk to some people, you look at it in the numbers, and some areas of investment look very, very healthy and strong. Others look all of a sudden quite materially weak, and so there does seem a bit of variability in there. In terms of the West Coast and the spending there, that's partly because they sort of had quite a drop, of course, during COVID when there wasn't quite as much coming through, but they've just got a very strong international focus at the moment, not quite as much domestically. Whereas if you look at the likes of the local region, the Waikato is much more, or sort of has a bit more of a balance. Yes, it's got Hobbiton and similar around Matamata Piako district, but a lot of the others is often a little bit more domestic tourism based. For example, I myself am heading down to Raglan for the long weekend. So I think that's sort of the pivot at the moment that you're seeing, is that the West Coast getting a lot more of that international spend coming through, particularly US tourists as well. Before even things started to go a bit awry in terms of expectations around tariffs, there was already a healthy level of US spend. The dairy hit, I think, in terms of spend hit, I think it'll probably take a little while, potentially towards the sort of third quarter of this year, potentially even later. Talking to people, there has been a real healthy level of starting to pay down debt, which I think is great. That's the right time to do it when you get that money, because you might need it again soon. Talking to a few fencing professionals, they seem to be doing a bit of a roaring trade as people do a bit of that deferred maintenance. So I think it's only after that you start to see a bit more investment coming through. So sort of, definitely the second half, third quarter-ish of this year. Hort is interesting because it's fairly broad-based, the gains that are coming through on Hort. We've seen a big lift in both volume and value for apples, for the likes of kiwi fruit, for cherries. Wine not doing quite as good, but there's some reasons for that. Still very, very healthy, and I think speaks to the fact that the rest of the world's quite impressed with what we can send out. Increasingly, I think probably what that means for the local region is, where there are horticultural opportunities, clearly there is some advantage to that in the right niche space, but also finding the right markets overseas, because they are quite busy. What was impressive, just as an anecdote, but sort of suggests the potential, New Zealand more than doubled our cherry exports into the Middle East over the start of this year. Very, very sort of niche option, but really does show that there are some dollars out there that are willing to pay quite a bit for premium New Zealand produce, and that certainly seems to be an opportunity for us. The last one was in terms of the Reserve Bank and the rates increases. Look, I think that seriously they might be done with rates increases. If you had inflation sitting at 2.5% and accelerating at any other time in economic history in New Zealand, the Reserve Bank wouldn't be even asking a question. They'd be hiking interest rates. Now, I don't think we're there yet because other parts of the economy are generally weaker. But remember that the Reserve Bank does not care about economic activity, GDP, employment, insofar as they care about inflation. If those other indicators contribute to more or less inflationary pressure, then they care. But at the moment, you do wonder if we're starting to move into what I'm starting to term a 2020 stagflation environment, not like the 70s, different, but where you do have sort of a weaker general economic impulse than before, certainly weaker employment impulse than before, but pricing pressures are still up there. And so those further increases to the likes of electricity and similar flowing through this year will make life for households increasingly, uncomfortable, and means that again, you've got this odd position where the economy's not doing great, but there's further pricing pressure coming through. The Reserve Bank's got a very tricky situation on its hands. I think the Reserve Bank is likely to maintain current official cash rate settings for a bit. The slight uptick in the chart at the end was more around the sort of worry or expectation that at some point, if we did have inflation that remained stubbornly high for too long, and when I say high, sort of more in that high 2s, low 3%, that could force the Reserve Bank to try and recalibrate again. So it's not a formal expectation, it's more of a signalling device that, hey, there could be a little bit more coming through than we're worried about it.
Thank you. Can I just point a clarification that my last one was actually the rates that regional councils and territorial authorities and electricity costs, which are increasing quite significantly, like 10% and 20% in rates case. What's the impact likely to be, the flow and impact in terms of our cost of living?
Yeah, I mean, well, as I'm sure you hear from constituents, certainly not helpful in terms of those rates rises that are coming through across the board. And the fact that for most areas of the country, they're sort of, that there are some quite large continued rates rises emerging. Part of that is driven by the fact that you've got those higher input costs yourselves as an organisation. And I think that's one of the difficulties that emerges when we talk about the likes of headline inflation, being at 2.5%. Great measure around how we spend on bananas and other stuff. But as a council, you don't buy bananas, you do earthworks and public transport and have to buy, diesel and buses and similar. So I think we're still into an area where we need to get better, more nuanced data on some of those cost changes. And we're doing a bit of work with LG&Z around that. But broader, yes, it will hit households at a time when, obviously, I think probably the biggest concern going forward is that there's still quite a high level of uncertainty around the labour market. People are worried about losing their jobs. And they're generally acting like it. That's why there's not quite as much ongoing spending as we might have liked or expected. And without that sort of push, then I do think you're going to see households that are continually worried about those higher costs of living, at the same time as not having quite as much boost on the other side, be it wages, better job opportunities or similar.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. I'll get a Ben Dunbar-Smith.
G'day, Brad. Fantastic how you managed to gather all the questions together, but I'm going to ask 3 separate questions. So the first one is, we've got $12 billion coming in from export revenues. So obviously dairy and horticulture are significant for this area. 2 things. One, the impact of tariffs and petrol prices rises, and also we've got Plan Change 1 coming through. We've got freshwater policies coming through, stricter environmental controls, and here we've got Te Ture Whaimana, the vision and strategy, which also will impact. Do you see dairy and other things continuing to support the region, or will we face a tail off coming?
Yep, all good questions. I think certainly on that last one around the likes of water and environmental regulation and similar, and what that means for the primary sector. I think people are going to have to sharpen their tools quite a lot to ensure they can continue operating. But that's already, I think, 1, well signalled, and 2, people are better positioned than other parts of the world and similar to actually keep that going. So I'd generally expect that the primary sector would be up for that. You might well, and I think already you are seeing that, the likes of animal numbers and similar are tailing off, even while you have sort of better both value and increases. And I think that's probably the area that we're likely to see more of, is that when we're looking at product opportunities across the world, it is around that sort of value option that we can add rather than necessarily more of it on a pure volume basis. You see that, I mean, if you look at dairy, for example, the fact that I think at one point New Zealand was supplying like a quarter of all of the cheese into China's pizza market. That's the sort of thing. You didn't need any more milk to produce that. You just had to turn the milk into more productive, higher value assets. So on that basis, I think things are probably in not a bad space. The challenge will be all of the overlapping changes coming through. That's quite a lot for people on farm to do, and a worry, I guess, around the likes of everyone then creating new cottage industry, so that, if you just get the right person to sign off on your plan of whatever it is, for $20,000 a pop, then all of a sudden you can sort of tick the right box for the planning regulation. So I think a little bit of worry around the implementation, definitely, but I think that given the importance of the primary sector and the returns that are still available, things are in not a bad spot there. Trying to think. Oh, your other question was around.
That's right. No, second question was in relation to Chris has talked about electricity prices. Now, last winter we had shortages and factories closing around here due to electricity. At the moment, we're dealing with a mandate that means that we cannot buy diesel buses anymore after the end of this year, and everything has to switch to electric, which could cost up to $282 million in capex alone. What's your anticipation for electricity prices and electricity supply, the regularity of it?
This season looks all right, and I say that at the moment. I think last I saw from Transpower was that hydro lake levels were about 94% of sort of more usual levels, so we're not quite into the same position we were at last year. So sort of security of supply looks firm enough for the moment. Of course, more difficult, particularly for private businesses, to try and access energy going forward. But I guess sort of trend prices are certainly higher over time, and the ability to transmit that energy that's generally more located in the South Island from a production point of view into the North Island for use is going to be a challenge. The work that seems to be ongoing from supported by government around the likes of deep geothermal around Taupō, that will be, I think, important and has more bipartisan support into the future. So I see real sort of promise or opportunity there. And the ongoing sort of focus on the likes of not only solar, but solar combined with battery operations. My father was part of the building team on one of the battery operations up north that opened recently. Those sort of options really do start to provide a little bit more security more generally. I guess the wider question or concern around the energy piece, and just to highlight that one of the concerns that came through last year with the few closures, particularly of forestry-related manufacturing, was, the question we got asked at the time was, is this the death of manufacturing in general? And it's not. And I say that because actually what seems to be the case is that, yes, you had higher energy costs, but you also had just lower prices for some of that product. You look at the likes of the Tokoroa operation. We ran some estimates last year just on general forestry and wood product prices, and it suggested that although overall operating costs would have been up around about 13% relative to 2019 levels, prices received would have been down at least 3%. So even if you take out the fact that operating costs were up, you're still seeing that some operators were taking lower prices for the stuff they were manufacturing. Both of those together are pretty unlikely to allow you to continue, but we're not seeing that in most other industries. That is a bit more isolated to the likes of forestry. So I think the manufacturing in general is still in an all right spot. There is concerns around, I guess, longer term security of supply. Hoping that we find another gas well or similar, or that we're sort of dependent on the rest of the world to not blow up ships in the Strait of Hormuz, does seem to be, difficult energy supply no matter where you are. But I'd sort of rather the devil you know and the devil you can influence than the rest.
Thank you. And the final one, you mentioned youth unemployment. Speaking anecdotally to a lawyer, they're not hiring graduates now because they're using AI. Are you starting to see AI impacting on the employment market?
We're hearing some of those anecdotes. I still haven't seen sort of too many specific examples, and I guess I say that because for as much as I'm hearing similar sorts of things to that anecdote, the fall in youth unemployment, or the fall in youth employment rather, predates a lot of that ChatGPT numbers coming through and similar. So I'm yet to hang my hat on the idea that it's all AI. There's certainly more talk about it. But there's also, I think, enough businesses that are also going, well, look, I might not need people in XYZ role because of ChatGPT or other AI operations, but I need people in other areas because I still need to have that sort of human-to-human connection. We're still assessing the figures. They're not conclusive enough yet, and it certainly has been a slower change in employment from automation than we first expected. I think when we looked at this back in 2015, we were expecting more of a sustained shift both here and across the world that didn't really pan out. So we're sort of holding our breath until the numbers suggest it much more formally and can be linked to AI. So not at the moment, but certainly watch this space.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. And finally, Jennifer Nicol.
I just wanted to check I am last on the list, is it? I actually don't have any questions for you, Brad. I've really enjoyed listening to the questions and the answers, but my feedback was more to Tracy and Blair on the paper, because I'm hoping that we might have this agenda item repeatedly to the end of the training in the Stratton Pole agenda, because as Ben and I mentioned last time, it'd be great to just keep refining the memo and the offering to get it to a point where we're finding it really, really useful. And all that stuff that we have talked about is really interesting. But having read what Blair prepared, I've just made a little bit of a list of suggestions for the future memos. And that would be perhaps having a global section, a New Zealand section, a regional section, and a table for the TAs as well. And I'm curious to know if the Economic Development Managers Forum and the things that are coming from each of those as part of that could be populated in that type of table, so we can see what the visions our TAs have for their economies, or what they're at least seeing, could come through to us in that level of detail. especially some of the quality of growth they're seeing rather than only the quantity emphasis, which might be, less interesting at that level, and the key issues they're seeing. And then separately, it would be quite good to have a section on the household cost of living, as well as Blair mentioned in paragraph 7 in the conclusion that understanding the nature of constraints and limits will be important for the region and the council as it moves forward. So perhaps a section on that. And a piece on resilience would be really good as well, because there's what Brad said, there's a balance to strike between playing to your strengths, but there's also the human needs and industry needs where we want to look at our self-sufficiency or the parts that we need to keep an eye on, considering all those long-term plan assumptions we see once every 3 years, which are quite long-term concerns. And it'd just be great to bring them more front of mind rather than just once every those 3 years, because I think that the balance in writing these memos will be how to focus on the short term, which is often very popular in this space, and adding a bit of that long term as well, so that we can take that into considerations with all the other decisions we're making. And then very lastly, if there could be a section on recommendations or just the piece on how it's really relevant to us as a regional council, what's in our sphere of influence based on all of the above, that at that point in time might be something for the council to consider. So that's quite a bit, but those are kind of where I was hoping that this paper might go in future. Anybody is welcome to comment on that, by the way. It's just whether it's Blair or Brad or yourself.
The chair's just told me where you go. So I guess thanks to that, councillor. There's a lot in there, and this was a paper in response to councillors' desire to get Brad in front of you so you could ask just what the state of play is. We'll go back, dissect, and
great start,
and put something together that is a bit more relevant and pertinent for August. It was intended to have something more thorough then, where both Blair and Brad have got some time to actually give it a bit more thought than what we've done over the last couple of weeks. That's a good start. I guess I'm also mindful of the Regional Economic Development Lead appointment, as I understand it, Karen, is imminent. So awesome. I just want to make sure that we're connecting up with that part of the business as well. But it's definitely something we've heard the message about, getting more regular reporting through this committee at least.
And I think next term it might be less frequent for sure. It's just would be nice to keep refining it as we go.
I will very much be taking the lead from Blair and the previous work that Blair used to do on the Regional Economic Monitor for Te Waka as well.
Great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Brad, Warren May here. Just prior to you packing your wetsuit and surfboard and bailing, do you have any insight just on around the screen industry and where that's looking at the moment for New Zealand?
Great question.
Thank you for the question. Nothing specific off the top of my head, but I'm happy to dive back into what numbers we do have and see what I can come up with there. I mean, certainly the feedback we've been hearing since budget was that the extension to the likes of the film production grant has been quite vital to sort of ensuring that things come through. Heck of a lot of competition in that area across the country. Everyone seems to be trying to sort of attract filming into the area. And I suspect that, again, potentially the advantage for the likes of the Waikato is around the fact that you have Auckland very close on your border, and that's where a lot of the post-production and other sort of heavy technical work comes through. And so, again, sort of using that potentially as a leapfrog compared to other areas where they are just, harder to reach relative to Auckland. If I may as well, just very briefly on the councillor's comment, I think part of this as well was a little bit of a, not necessarily proof of concept, but trying it out a little bit more and providing a little bit of insight there. So it's been good and quite useful from my point of view as well to hear a little bit more about what's of interest and what we can try and pack in. There's always a lot working and moving in the economy, both sort of the short term and the long term. And I think the last point around how do you make it relevant and what does it mean for council and council making decisions, that's something that, again, with a bit more time now up our sleeves, I'll sit down with Blair at some point and make sure that we've got something a little bit more focused and structured when we come through, from my end at least, because council staff stuff is very well structured. Mine was a little bit more thrown together. But yeah, no, like I say, more structured come the August update as well.
Awesome, thanks, Brad. And I'll just quickly come to Councillor Robbie Cookson for a final.
Yeah,
question.
Brad, I know that the rural sector is actually holding the can there at the moment, but there's actually still quite a bit of pressure on us. We're well, in agriculture, and if you're in flood protection areas, there's 10 to 20% rate increases. There's debt payments. We got big tax bills to pay this year, like that we haven't received in other seasons. And then just compliance of upgrading of, assets that you've depreciated because the income hasn't been there. So you've actually had to invest that this season, which isn't so bad when you got an extra 20% depreciation on that from the government. So there is still a lot of pressure on us out there and just speaking with Noel the other day, freezer beef now to sell to the meat companies are $3,000. So you take the cost of that, a meat in a supermarket's going to increase considerably so the cost of living is actually going to increase a lot more than I think is being suggested. And we're feeling that as well. Energy costs, and I put a contract milker on there on my property this year. His energy costs nearly doubled in that 12 months through that winter section. So there's a lot of pressure out there still. So I think there's still a bit more pain, a lot more pain to come in the next 6 to 12 months.
No, and certainly understood. I think the other part that plays into is the fact that there hasn't been a lot of relief earlier. Like, it's not like prices have gone lower and have then started to rise back. It's just they've plateaued out at a high level. When we looked at likes of on-farm costs, according to the Stats NZ Farm Expenses Price Index, operating costs are still sitting on average about 28% above 2020 levels. And again, I mean, that's on average, even though interest rates have fallen back 15%, even though fuel and fertiliser has come down a touch, you've still got that pretty big margin on top. So you're completely right in terms of that further pressure. I think it's also the entire cost base of operations, be it for a on farm, for a council, whatever, has fundamentally shifted. Like, we're not going back to what we had before. We've sort of seen that new normal, and that new normal is high, and it's already got a little bit more pressure added to it. So point certainly taken about that further increase likely to come through.
Well, but like palm kernel on the field days at 305, but then maize growers are going to want 45 cents for maize standing this year, 48 cents in the stack sort of thing. So them costs aren't going away. That's already predicted in 6 months' time, and we've got to live in that market. So, yeah, thank you anyway.
Yeah, so that wraps us up. So thank you very much for taking time out to speak to us today, Brad. Much appreciated, and again, really, really informative. And we've obviously got a little bit of a structure going forward for the next report in August. So looking forward to that. And so thank you very much. So I'm happy to move the State of the Regional Economy report. Second, thank you, Katarina. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried.
Next week.
We will carry on. We're a few minutes short from 12 o'clock, but we'll move on to the next item, excuse me, which I believe is on page 348, and that is the update on the Sustainable Peatland Programme.
So, councillors, this is really to give you an update. We've got Justin and Hayden here just to let you know where we're at with the program. We will be taking an associated contract through to council next week and publicly excluded because it's still going through commercial negotiations, but we just wanted to give you an update of where things are at, considering high degree of interest. So it will be a bit of a whistle-stop tour over where we're at, and as I said, in council next week there will be we'll be seeking a contract approval purely because we're out of sync with Finance and Services Committee timing, otherwise we would take it there. So the gents will just give you a very high level fly through where we're at, and Geordie, I think we've got a quick presentation.
348. Yeah, I did jump a topic, but yeah, sorry. Yeah, but we will carry on where we're at. Yeah. I turned the page too early.
Good morning, councillors. So I'm Justin Wyatt, and here with me is my team leader, Hayden Jones, and we're from the Soil and Land Science team here at Waikato Regional Council. So the purpose of this paper is to provide an update on work relating to the Sustainable Peatlands Programme, outline key work for the programme over the coming years, and highlight externally aligned work and their synergies. So the staff recommendation for this paper is that it be received. Next slide, please. So just a quick recap on the peatlands in our region. So the Waikato region really is the centre of, well, the centre of peatlands in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So we have about 40% of the national peatland resource by area, as shown by the diagram on the left there. So these peatlands were formed in wetlands where a high water table prevented the breakdown of organic matter, allowing thick layers of peat to accumulate. In our region, we have about 84,000 hectares of peatlands, and the peat in these can be up to 14 metres thick. Over the past 100 years, about 80% of these have been drained, mostly for economically productive land uses. And the image on the right there just shows the current day land use of the majority of our peatlands in our region. As you can see, it's dominated by pastoral agriculture. Next slide, please. Okay, so the peatland program is responding to issues associated with peatland drainage, and that is land subsidence, which is about 2 centimetres per year across our region's peatlands, but also greenhouse gas emissions associated to drainage. And if those greenhouse gas emissions were included in our regional greenhouse gas inventory, which are not currently, that equate to about 11% of gross regional greenhouse gas emissions. The program also supports a peatland section in the Waikato Regional Policy Statement, which is around reducing subsidence and greenhouse gas emissions from our drained peatlands. The program's key outcomes are reducing subsidence and greenhouse gas emissions within the context of current land and drainage management, identifying opportunities to stop peat subsidence in the context of potentially alternative land uses, and if we could get external funding testing those, and also better understanding the risks and spatial variability of drained peatland greenhouse gas emissions, and that includes subsidence too. So the program runs through to the end of the 29-30 financial year and has been approved through the long-term plan. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to go through a few slides talking about some of the work that we've been doing since I last talked to you, and I think it was September last year. So we've been investigating the use of satellite-based remote sensing to monitor land subsidence in our peatlands. So the council already has a peat subsidence monitoring program, but this additional work is really just to, I guess, trial a new technique, and that will complement our existing program. So we've done a pilot study working with a contractor over Moana Tuatua peatland. So Moana Tuatua peatland is about 9,000 hectares of mostly or pretty much entirely drained peats between Cambridge and Taumutu. So in the image on your right there, the black outline shows, I guess, the outline of the peatland. And so how INSAR works, or the satellite remote sensing approach we use that we're testing is called INSAR, and essentially what happens is a satellite flies over the Earth every 12 days and takes a radar image of the Earth's surface. And then if we compare those radar images over time, we can see how the ground is changing, or the surface elevation is changing. So we looked at a period July 2018 to August 2020, as shown in the image there. And within Moana Tuatua peatland, the average subsidence rate during that period across the peatland was about 45 millimetres a year. So a bit higher than we'd normally expect, but within the order of magnitude of what we would expect. However, the method needs development. So in the image there, you can see that the darker blue the area is, the more subsidence there is. However, which makes sense. However, we tried to look at other time periods, but due to missing imagery, the subsidence signature wasn't as clear and much more variable. So there's an issue with missing imagery. And also you'll notice there's blue areas around the outside of the peatland, which suggests mineral soil subsidence, which is quite unusual. And we need to work out whether that's an issue with the method or something that's actually happening. Next.
Using ground truthing reference points, physically going out and checking.
So the rest of our program, I guess this, if you can imagine that we have a program where we monitor peat subsidence, we have sites on the ground where we continuously monitor surface elevation change, and then we have LiDAR monitoring, which is transects across our peatlands, which we've done a lot of work to, I guess, validate the LiDAR that we're taking or collecting, and then this sits above that, and the idea is that each of these methods will validate the next one up. The good thing about this method is it's relatively, I guess, cheap to acquire, and it can cover all of our peatlands, so it's potentially, I guess, a cost-effective method. But you're right, we do need to make sure that we, I guess, validate it.
Serious issue for landowners who are sick and tired of your peat sunk 30 centimetres this year or 40 centimetres average, and it's not site specific, and different landowners treat their peat differently. We saw a terrible example yesterday, won't name it, etc., of cropping right up to the drain edge.
Next slide, please. We've also been doing some work to better understand our peatland resource, so that's the depth, the extent, and just to understand how much carbon is actually stored in our peatlands. So in about 2023, we went out and we measured peat depths across our region's peatlands, and more recently we've been taking that information and developing peat depth maps. So the image on the right there is a draft of one of those maps that's currently being created, and that's for the peatlands on the Haraki Plains, which are west of Ngātia and Paeroa. So the idea is these maps will be created, and on these maps there'll be contour lines which represent increments of peat thickness or peat depth. And then what we've also been doing is, just this summer, we've been going out to a representative sample of our peatlands and taking samples of soil carbon right down to the base of the peat. So through the entire profile, there's some sites where we've sampled up to 10 metres deep. So the images A and B on the right there are just an example of some of those samples. And the B is quite interesting because that's actually a sample of right at the base of the peat, near Kapuatai, on farmland, about 3.5 metres deep. And you can see the mineral material, which is kind of the light coloured grey blue material there. So that's the material that's actually sitting underneath the peat. So the idea is that with these samples, we will send them to the lab and I guess use them to work out combined with the information we have on the depth of our peatlands, but just use them to understand how much carbon is actually stored in our peatlands. Next slide, please. We've also been doing work to understand the vulnerability of our peatlands to ongoing subsidence or land subsidence, and also greenhouse gas emissions. And in the past 8 months or so, we've run 2 expert workshops. And the purpose of those workshops were to understand how this index should be structured and what sort of components we should include in that index. And at its simplest level, it's about combining information about the resource, as in how deep is it, how much carbon is there, and the rate of loss of that resource. So that could be in terms of subsidence, the rate of subsidence, or the rate of carbon emissions. On the left there in that diagram, it's just, I guess, a simplified example of how a vulnerability index might look. And I guess that would be, those most vulnerable areas would be those with the deepest peat, but also the highest rates of loss. But there are confounding factors that we need to work on. That's a very simplified example. For example, land surface elevation relative catchment outlet is an important consideration when we're putting all of this together. Next slide, please. We've also been doing some work to develop a peatland roadmap, and that is to set out the long-term vision and pathways for peatland management in the Waikato region. So about a month ago, we held an internal cross-organisational workshop, so with staff from WRC, to identify values, issues and opportunities for peatlands in the Waikato region that could inform a peatland roadmap. And as part of that workshop, and a really important piece, is to identify, we did work to identify wider stakeholders who would be interested and want to contribute to this roadmap, how best to engage with them, and what information we need to share with them to help develop this roadmap. So in the workshop, the group identified that stakeholders could include, for example, tangata whenua, environmental interest groups, territorial authorities, landowners, industry groups, government agencies, and the local community associated with peatlands. Next slide, please.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, question, observation, whatever. Talking, there's a lot of peat in the Waikato constituency. And Robbie's got lots of, and with our ICM connections, we're talking a lot to landowners. Their biggest concern is that they're thrown in there, not even up the forefront. The landowners are the ones that have possession, and they have got the greatest interest in what's going on, but they're thrown in the, in the mob, down the back end of it. If I'm assuming it's, you've got landowners, you've got industry, so the sector groups. Those landowners are not feeling involved, empowered. I don't know who you're talking to, and this is not a criticism of you personally. This is a reflection of their comments, is that they are not feeling involved in this peat studies work at all, and they are very concerned what one-on-one is making 3 to a lot of them. So we haven't brought them on board since we funded this through the LTP. I am greatly concerned about what isn't being done to bring them on side. Thanks.
Tracy.
Yeah, if I can just make a comment, I guess the guys were very clear in the LTP that the engagement focus was year 2. So that is the year that is coming up. So that is the 25-26 year, and they needed to do the work in year 1 to get everything lined up. They heard, and as Justin just said, the very important part of it, we did hear the messages through the LTP around that engagement. The recent article, I think, Noel, that you shared kind of mixed peat with Plan Change 1 with everything else that was going on. So we're very, very cognizant of the need to be very clever and smart and engaging in our engagement process, but it is definitely the focus for the 25-26 year 2 of the LTP. We've heard it. We just haven't addressed it as yet.
I appreciate it. The problem for them is that the gap between the LTP and actual face-to-face is, and there are too long. It's like, I won't digress, but they're demanding to know when certain things happen that council has talked about, and they're sick of waiting. So let's not increase their anxiety. Thank you.
Thanks, Noel. Chris.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to support what Noel's saying, and I guess I look at it from a slightly different perspective because it doesn't directly affect me, but we've got, there's a book for Pete's sake, which, thank you, Tracy, for sending that through. There's a lot of knowledge that's out there at the moment, but the big knowledge base is in our farming group. They've farmed this land now for 60, 80, 100 years. The knowledge that they hold is immense. And I would have thought that would have been the top of the list, that we'd have been picking that data up before we start doing anything. So our knowledge base is based on history. Then we can bring the science to bear with this process, but the two need to be matched together. You can't bring them in after the event and then they'll say, well, they do, what have you told us? We already knew that. So I'm supporting Noel on this. I think
it's going on that journey, and that article that you referred to, Tracy, out of the Farmers Weekly, was about the early engagement. So take them on the journey with them. Touch point, like we're doing this, and this is what it will entail, and we'll come back to you in 6 months, 12 months, whatever, and we'll give you updates, or you can send in questions in the meantime. But we will come into full-on engagement. They don't feel as if they're being, and while Robbie and I and other councillors might be telling them they want to feel as if they are part of the process. That's all I'm saying. So, thank you.
Okay, Robbie.
No, just support what Noel and Chris said. But if I think if we're elected here in several months' time, I would like to be fully and more involved in this. As a constituent councillor that owns a peat farm, I most probably know more people than anyone else in the room that farms these sort of properties. My family my dad and my uncle broke in most of the peatland from Morrinsville to Gordonton for settlers and returned soldiers. So they actually they went out there on TD9s with on boards, and they crushed all the area that was able to be brought back as returned soldiers. So my family and my brother's a scientist as well. We've got a lot of depth and knowledge, even though we're not the elders in the group, but we can definitely help you get some really good direction of people that need to be around the table here and have a really good discussion. I think the other thing that there's actually some talk about in the Hauraki Plains that actually some Hauraki District Council staff have talked about is why aren't we mining silt from the Piaka River, putting it over the peat and actually making a mineralized layer that it can't actually biodegrade and emit methane anyway, because it would be sealed in the topsoil of. So there's a whole lot of other discussions that other people are out there having that you haven't even involved them in having a good discussion of some ways of protecting and looking after peat in the future. So there's a big group of people out there that have got a lot of vested interest in this place. So thank you.
Yeah, I think from my understanding, we're at the beginning of this journey. Yes, it takes time, and we're understanding that. We're getting a bit of an update from the guys and that sort of thing. They're well aware of their requirements and the levels that we hold them to for actually consultation around the various groups and landowners and stuff like that. So I think we're seeing this progress, and we'll just take this update as it stands. Chris.
Yeah, look, one of the earlier presentations, and you may well have done it, but the Wallace Corporation own one of the biggest properties in that area. They've been doing this work now, as I understand, for 15 years. Richard Snell's a soil scientist. He's a very clever and articulate guy. He's the manager of the operation. Have you spoken with Richard?
Yes. So we have, over quite a few years now, our colleagues at the University of Waikato and Ngāti Whenua have greenhouse gas monitoring site on JD and RD Wallace Farm. We have two land surface we have two sites where we continuously monitor and land surface elevation. We've had a couple of field days on their farm, so just around helping us understand their operation and sharing our knowledge with them. So Wallaces have been engaged for quite a number of years now.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that. And I would have hoped that their knowledge base would have assisted you with. I didn't see any of that up there because they've got an extensive, as you know, got an extensive knowledge base of it.
Yeah, they've been very helpful.
Thanks for that, Ben.
I might have missed it, but for Pete's sake, is not here in the references.
No.
Why not?
We've previously provided that to you.
To us, but it's not referenced here for other people in terms of the work that's. I mean, is it subject to the work that's? I know, but I'm saying, is it something that you're using as part of your work?
So I guess for Pete's sake, it covers a lot of things associated with peatland management, and probably the key things in there around cultivation and drainage management. So I guess those would have been based on work that was done previously. So I guess that is forming the foundation of our current knowledge, but for Pete's sake, the information in there, whilst it is very useful, there's no, I mean, for scientists, we base kind of, I guess, our work on what's gone before us and I guess how that's being kind of presented or published or where we find it. And some of the work in for Pete's sake is that the guidance, there's no, I guess, local literature that supports that, which makes it, it makes it, I guess, challenging to kind of understand where the guidance, there's nothing wrong with the guidance, like around raising water tables and stuff like that, but it's just the literature that supports that doesn't exist. But that's not to say it doesn't work, because we know from looking internationally, that, you know, raising the water table control is a key, I guess, activity to reduce subsidence and greenhouse gas emissions. But what we don't know is how to implement that locally, or just what effect that has for our own peatlands. So if you raise the water table by X, what impact does that actually have on the rate of greenhouse gas emissions and subsidence? And because, I mean, to do these things is quite a lot of investment. So if you're telling people that you need to raise the water table and they just go and stick a block in the drain, and that's, I guess, we don't know how effective that actually is.
Yeah, no, it was simply to say that the past
Don't want to get into that.
has some use.
Yes, it
and
does,
that
yes.
maybe you can test it
Definitely.
scientifically.
Yeah.
You want to speak to that, Aidan?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Don't know if can of worms.
One of the key outputs later in the program is updated guidance around peatland management. So the work that we're doing now is going towards informing an updated version of For Pete's Sake.
Yep, thank you. I'll skip Robbie because he's going to
Nah.
tell us what happens if you put a block in a drain.
No, I'm not
I know
going to
that.
tell you a block in a drain because that research has already been done overseas. Because in America, they flood their peat in the wintertime and drain it in the summer because they know that's what protects it. So
Yeah. So again, once again, this is we're part of a process and we're moving forward. So if we can move on with the next slides, Justin.
Yeah, next slide, please. So just going back to the peatland roadmap. So within the workshop, for each stakeholder group, the workshop participants, so WRC staff, identified the aims and interests that they thought would be relative to the stakeholders' interest in peatlands, the likely impacts on stakeholders from ongoing peatland issues, the impacts on stakeholders from potentially implementing change, and also a discussion around what are the best ways to engage with these stakeholders or the most effective ways. So over the next financial year, the plans for this piece of work is to collate information from the workshop because it is only recent, get some input on, I guess, some of the things we've identified in terms of vision, values of, sorry, not vision, but values and issues with our peatlands with some of our external colleagues, and then go to an external stakeholder workshop, and that is, I guess, engaging with stakeholders that we've identified, bring all that information together, develop a draft roadmap, workshop that again, get feedback on that, refine it, and then present it in a forum such as this. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview about some upcoming work that we have. So a key project in the Sustainable Peatlands Programme is to field test mitigations locally to reduce subsidence and greenhouse gas emissions. New Zealand peatlands are unique, and there's a lot of international literature out there which gives us guidance on what the effect of doing some of these mitigations might be. However, it's hard to directly apply international knowledge locally confidently because of our different types of peatlands, our different climates, and our different land management and drainage management practices. So there is anecdotal evidence locally, which is really helpful, but nothing has ever really been properly tested. And of course, that's what we're trying to do here. So we have two significant pieces of work. One is really understanding the feasibility of raising the water table and its impact on subsidence and greenhouse gas emissions. And the other is to understand the impact of cropping on peat subsidence and greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. The project will run for 4 years, starting this next financial year. So of course, the first year will be about site selection, engaging with landowners, setting up the initial, I guess, experimental sites, initial measurements to start off with, and then subsequent years are just repeating those measurements, I guess getting a time series of data, and then progress reporting for each year. Final reporting will be in the 4th and final year, and that's really reporting the outcome of this work, although there will be updates throughout the course of the project. For this work, there's a significant level of expertise required, a really good understanding of peatland systems, especially our local peatland systems. There's complex measurements involved, so greenhouse gas emissions aren't easy to measure, and there's limited expertise in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to do that. Hydrological manipulation will be required, so input will be required there. So contracting will be required. The total value of the project approved through the LTP is $2.14 million over the next 4 years, and we're currently working through the procurement process, and we'll be coming back to council next week, I think, to discuss that. Next slide, please. So there's currently 3 national level projects which align really well with our Sustainable Peatlands Programme, and each of those are just starting off as well, or have been going for just this last year, but not long. So first off, there's the Peatland Adaptation Pathways Project, which is actually co-led by WRC, so us, and Manaaki Whenua. And that project is about rolling out our peatlands program, well, I guess taking the peatlands program that we have here and actually rolling that out nationally, or doing work around implementing that, or research around implementing that work nationally. And also, I guess, the value add and why we're involved is because it adds value for WRC by incorporating local land use change scenario modelling. So if we were to, I guess, apply different scenarios, how might that affect land use and, I guess, the economics of land use in the future? There's also another project, it's called MAPS-C. So it's modelling and measuring agricultural management on peat soils to enhance removals and sequestration of carbon. That is led by the University of Waikato and Manaaki Whenua. There's also collaborating with an Irish consortium, but it's funded by MPI. And that is really just trying to improve the data that we have in terms of national greenhouse gas emissions accounting, and also to try and build local, I guess, research expertise and knowledge in peatlands. And then the third project is called REDOS, and this one has been funded through the NZAGRC, and this is just about to start. And this is called Reducing Emissions from Drained Organic Soils. Again, this is co-led by the University of Waikato and Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. And this project is about understanding the relationship, the fundamentals of the relationship between water table depth and emissions, and opportunities to reduce those emissions through less intensive land uses. So the MAPS-C and REDOS projects closely align and complement the work that we are proposing to contract in the slides previously. However, those two projects are really focusing on providing fundamental information. So, and where our work comes in is we're actually looking at the feasibility of implementation. Also, they're doing work looking at cropping as well, and so are we. So that provides replication of measurement sites and also the ability to look at different, I guess, cropping management techniques. So the aligned work also focuses really heavily on greenhouse gas emissions, whereas we're also very interested in subsidence measurement too. Next slide, please. So just my last slide. So this diagram here was provided by Professor Louis Schipper from the University of Waikato, so one of our colleagues that we work with closely, and he, I guess, leads the REDOS and the MAPS-C projects on behalf of the University of Waikato. So really all this, the key thing with this diagram, it just presents the interaction between the MAPS-C project, the REDOS project, and our own project, and just shows, I guess, how they align with each other and complement each other. So on that diagram, each symbol represents a greenhouse gas measurement site, and all of these sites will be based in the Waikato region. So even though the nationally funded work is nationally funded, the focus of the work will be in our region. And so it just shows how this investigation will be spread from, I guess, understanding emissions within the context of current land use, for example, intensive land uses like the effect of cropping, like I was speaking about before, and then right up to, looking at emissions from if land was just, I guess, retired, and then finally land that's restored. On the right-hand side there, you'll see kind of a stack of sites, and really that is understanding the fundamental relationship between water table depth and greenhouse gas emissions. So each of those sites represents, I guess, a site of decreasing water table depth. So I guess it's just really to show how it all kind of goes together. Final slide, please. So just to conclude, the Sustainable Peatlands Programme seeks to improve the management of the region's peatlands. Since the last update, the Soil and Land Science team have completed work including investigating new but complementary approaches to monitor land subsidence, collected and collated peatland resource information, started the development of a peatland index of vulnerability, and held an internal workshop to start the development of a peatland roadmap. Currently working through procuring the services for field investigations to test options to reduce subsidence and greenhouse gas emissions. But there is also a significant amount of externally funded work that aligns with our own work that, for the first time in a very, very long time, collectively represents an opportunity to develop significant new knowledge related to our region's peatlands. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Justin. Looks like we have a few questions. Chris?
Yeah, I guess my first question is, how do we know our peatlands are so different to peatlands anywhere else? Peatland is peatland.
Look, oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So our peatlands, I guess the climate that they occur in, it's quite a temperate climate. It's quite warm. And so it's really interesting that we have peatlands in an area where we have a really high seasonal water deficit. It's quite dry over summer, and that's because our peatland vegetation is really good at, I guess, limiting transpiration, so limiting evaporation. So a lot of peatlands we see overseas are in different climates. They are, I guess, formed from sphagnum, whereas ours are formed from a plant kind of family or species called restiads. So I guess those are some of the key differences. And some of our, I guess, our land management practices are different to overseas as well.
Okay. Probably more confused than I was when I asked the question. So you've on that chat, one slide back, please. You've got their land retirement. Can you tell me who's going to pay for that?
Me? No, I can't tell you that.
Well, that's a major statement. The value of the land and the peatland in the Waikato, I don't know. Robbie, no, what's it worth?
$45,000 a hectare.
Okay, so how many hectares? 84,000? Work it out. Who's going to pay for that? And retire all. And who's going to replace the productivity that comes off it now and feeds New Zealanders, feeds the world? Vegetables, dairy. Well, I'm just looking at it from a practical point of view. Like, what are we doing this for?
I'm not sure that's actually a goal as such.
Well, why is it on this?
So that particular, I guess I can talk about that particular monitoring site there. So there is a farm who I guess Manaki Whenua and the University of Waikato, and we have some land subsidence monitoring on their farm. And part of their farm, they have decided that it's no longer economically viable to continue with pastoral agriculture. And I guess they have shut the gates and are not, they've just let it go back to weeds. And I guess so that site has just been placed, that monitoring site has been placed to see what the effect of that is on greenhouse gas emissions. That's the purpose of that particular site. And I guess it is a form of land retirement. So I guess in the future, if there were locations where people are like, well, this is not economically productive anymore, what happens to the greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, so thanks for clarifying that for that diagram and what that actually means. And I think Chris might have taken it slightly different.
Well,
that's a good question.
It scares the hell out of me where we're heading with this. That's all.
Yeah. No.
Okay, so leaving that there, please. So I have started to wonder what we gave the 2.1 million, I think it was, in the LTP for over the 4 years. My understanding and recollection was that a proposal was put up that would end up collating the research because of the volumes and huge amount that has been done on peat over the years. And from that collation of work, recommendations would be made to landowners to recommend ways in which landowners could better manage their peat soils for longevity and the likes. The moment I saw the word land retirement up there, as I think I'm used to seeing this sort of thing, but most landowners who have got peat are not seeing it there, and again would jump to the conclusion that we're talking land retirement, who's paying for it? So we've got to be absolutely clear on what the intent of these slides are, because that sort of, you went to a presentation and said, this is what we've been doing in workshops amongst the scientists, and here's what, this is happening in a piece of land, and they see land retirement. Their listing stops, and it's all alarmed, and when you get a fright, you just do not take anything in. So my concern is it's seeing that sort of thing up there. Well, how you frame presentations and the likes, or how you work into a presentation. This relates to a piece of work, and we're monitoring it because there has been land retirement, blah, blah, blah. It's the matter of how you communicate and you take the people on a journey, you do not present that, because that scares them and they don't listen and they don't hear.
Optics.
So, yeah, optics, exactly.
Yeah.
I've used that word in the last few days a few times. Therefore, what it shows is a predetermination, and that's what we've got to get away from, those optics of predetermination. And
I'll get a comment from Tracy here, Noel, just before you.
yeah, but before you do, please, because I haven't finished. The issue for me is I go back to the start. What did we actually sign up to as council when we appropriated the $2.1 million or whatever it was? Because what I'm seeing is a development of a whole lot of new research when I understood it was to be based on research that had been done to bring it together and present it to landowners so that they could use it in a way in which they could better manage their ongoing peat soils. So, yeah, an ongoing management of the peat soil. So I'm seeing a completely different, let's do some more research and come up with a whole lot more stuff, and which is what a lot of landowners have been saying to us, councillors, you're just doing the same old and wasting $2.1 million. So please, I need some clarity.
So I'll be very clear through you, Mr. Chair, that 4 times we brought the information back on the detail to the exact questions that you're asking now. There is nothing new. We said it was an amalgamation of what's been done because it's a respect for that work, but it's also new work, and we costed that, and I went back to Hayden and Justin 4 times, and we provided that spreadsheet at detail for each site and the cost of that through their long-term plan process, because quite rightly, councils tested us hard to say, is this the right expense of money? In terms of predetermination, we're not predetermining retirement. We are not predetermining rules, but we know that there will be rules for ongoing management of peatlands, not locking up, not protection, not total sterilisation. And I've come back to councillors time and time again and said we need the evidence base first before we go into the policy, except exactly what you're saying around better framing of messages. But again, this was a message to take to this committee, not to the public, but it does need to be framed well so that there isn't that perception that there is a predetermination, because there isn't. We're dealing with scientists. They don't predetermine outcomes. They're looking at the facts. So I just want to be clear, there is nothing new in this work stream that wasn't approved in the long-term plan. In fact, Justin and Hayden's business case was the most well thought out, considered, probably itemised business case. So I just want to give you that confidence, Noel, that this is not new work. This is work that was always anticipated and what was asked for and locked into the LTP. It's building on that previous work, but a lot of that previous work is dated and things change. So it's not new. And the reason we are doing this is, and I hear Robbie all the time in my head around respecting the legacy of the people who have used that land. There is no judgment about whether that is good or bad use to date. That's just what it is. So it's respecting that legacy of knowledge. But if we are in the future having to look at provisions to manage the land, we can't go on he said, she said. We need the evidence. That's what we're gathering, but augmenting it with that critical knowledge of landowners and involving them. So I know this is a really charged, complex business case. These guys are making sure to stick to what we have approved.
Okay,
It's
so
really
can I just make
important.
one last comment, and hopefully you've got a good memory, because I think I have. I asked you a direct question during the LTP, and I said on the subject, is this work leading to new rules and the likes for peat? And you said to me that was not the intention of this work. But I've just heard a couple of comments in the room that makes me still worry that we are taken on a journey that we will lead to new rules rather than voluntary and encouragement. And here's the best example.
So I have got a good memory, unfortunately, for many people. I did say that is not the intent of this work, but what I did say is that maybe that we have a statutory responsibility to allocate resources. One of those resources is soil, and one of those resources as part of that is peat. There may be rules in the future, not getting away from
Nothing
that.
guaranteed, so yes.
But to get to that, we need a really good foundation for those people who are going to say to us, step away, you don't need to do anything. And the others who say, you need to go harder, you need to lock things up. We know, we are very, very cognizant of the fact of you can't lock things up, throw away the key and say to people, you can't use stuff anymore. Our job is around management. So we need this information to help us manage.
Can I ask one thing,
we-
Tracy? Because I think we can cut this if we can. Can I just ask that when we go into the next phase of consultation with the wider community, that we go in there with a clear message that this work is being done to find out the best ways and recommendations, etc. However, as a result of this work, it may lead to the introduction of rules or other practices as a result of our learnings. So just be upfront with people.
That's been our consistent messaging all the way along.
Yeah.
And we are mindful of, some people don't want to hear that message, as we know in many of the things we do. But the other thing is we know that we need to message it well and cleverly as well.
Thank
We've
you.
heard that.
That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Robbie?
I don't need to talk for very long, but all I need to say is
Thomas?
this should lead to best practices.
Yep.
That's it for now. Where that goes in the future, it will go, but this will be direction to landowners of best practice to manage their farms, whatever it's cropping or dairy, port, veggies, it doesn't matter. So that's where I hope it leads to, because that's what direction they need to manage their resource. So
With the latest information we can provide them. Yep. Jen, did you have a comment?
Very well spoken, Tracy, and nice follow-up. Thank you from.
I just wanted to ask, when is the WRC economic impact going to be starting? At what stage does that line of work? Because you've mentioned it a number of times that you're going to be assessing the economics of it or the impact.
So that's part of the SLAMAC project, which is nationally funded actually. And so that's a 4-year project. And so we've just finished year 1 and it's at so it's a 3-year project. So we've just finished year 1. So I guess, and that's the very last piece that's done. And
Okay.
so I guess it'll be in 2 years, the end of 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Dunbar-Smith, we can bring an update on how that project's tracking for you, because I know it's a critical part of all of this and the approach in terms of that economic impact. So at a specific juncture of where that project's at, we can bring it back just so you can, again, be across that.
What I heard was that WRC was going to be looking at the impacts of things, but then it sounds like it's the national LAMAC
In
one.
partnership, I guess it's maximising the investment that we've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, no other questions? We have the receiving of the report. Happy to move. Thank you, Robbie. Happy to second. Thank you, Warren. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. And I think we will now adjourn for lunch and come back. Unfortunately, Katarina, yes. If we can make it 1 o'clock. But the beef is really soft. So you'll be right.